welcome back to the channel guys. I am the Drunken Goth and we are back on the GT4 again. Today we are going to be working on the fuel system. More specifically, we're going to clean up and rebuild those carburetors and get the fuel filter housing all cleaned up, looking good as new, and change the fuel filter inside it as well. So next on the list is the carburetors. So relatively easy. We're going to get a thinner's bath filled up so we can start cleaning down some of the individual parts. We're going to bathe them, get all the crap off them, and to be fair, for the most part, the only tool we really need whilst going through these is a screwdriver. As you can see in the top section, we've got the float, make sure that's not sticking at all, and real good. Old gasket. And so far we are looking pretty clean in there. Accelerator pump works nicely. It's relatively good already, but we will be changing it. So while we are rowing in, stripping down those carburetors, the carb rebuild kits that we've got are from Superformance, and the one kit contains enough for all four of the carburetors, so it's literally just buy the carb rebuild kit and it's one kit for the car. Now they do contain virtually everything you need to rebuild the carbs, so new seals for the banjos on the fuel rail, they contain the new diaphragms for the accelerator pump, the new float valves for the floats in the float chamber. So pretty much everything that you'd need to fully change, anything you'd need to change when doing a good service on these carburetors. So we've pretty much got everything we need from here. Now obviously the reason we're using the thinner's bath is thinners is very good for breaking down what essentially becomes like varnish. Stale old fuel tends to go into a very sticky varnish like substance, and that can gam up a lot of the valves, it can gum up a lot of the jets, and of course on the float valves as well, it can cause them to stick, and it's not something you really want, as if the float sticks then the carb continues filling up with fuel until it just starts flowing out, spitting out of the float chamber and going everywhere. Now of course as well, because of how much work we put into the block, obviously we've got block paint and stuff like that on it, but fuel is not going to be very good for that. And of course we want to keep this engine looking as good as possible, but also very usable. So it's the paint that we use does have some durability to fuel going on it, but not if we end up with massive amounts. So we're going to do as best to make sure these carbs are as good as possible before we bolt them back on, so that if we do get any small drips, small weeps when we're setting them all back up, it shouldn't be too much of a problem, and the engine should still look as good as when we first started coating it all. Now, so as the video isn't too boring and isn't just me constantly dipping 4 different carburetors into a thinner's bath, I have skipped over some of it. So what you don't see is obviously we go through and clean all the jets as well, taking the tops off them. Once they've been through the thinner's bath, we then get the airline, blow them all out, make sure there's nothing left in there, make sure they're good and clear, and yeah, basically just going through cleaning everything up as much as possible. Obviously you'll have just seen me scraping off the last of the gaskets that go onto the inlet manifold. They don't come in the carb rebuild kit, they do need to be bought separately, as well as the Bakelite spacers that go on the inlet manifold between the carbs as well. So if this is something you're doing yourself, just bear that in mind, that a carb rebuild kit, you'll then need the inlet manifold gaskets and the Bakelite spacers if you're doing it yourself, as they come separately. Again, not a lot of money, and it's always worth doing as a matter of course when you're taking carburetors off to rebuild them, to service them. So just a quick note that obviously make sure you account for that if this is a job that you are doing yourself. You'll find that will get most of the crap off. So any of the sort of dried fuel, anything like that that's on the outside, that usually gets everything off. So it gives us a nice base to start cleaning them up properly and get these back to looking as good as possible. So we're just about at the point where we're going to start reassembling this one. So we've got new gaskets, we have new diaphragm for the accelerator pump, new copper washers on most bits, and yeah, let's get it back together. So one other thing to note when putting the carburetor back together is that once it's been through the thinner's bath, once all the parts have been through the thinner's bath, it is always a good idea to just give it a little bit of time before you reassemble it, just to make sure all the thinners has evaporated off. Obviously we've used an airline to dry a lot of it off anyway, but it's always a good idea just to give it a little bit of time, just to make sure any of the remaining thinners does evaporate off, as some of the parts that we've changed and some of the bits that we've had out and are putting back on, they do have rubber washers, rubber seals. Now obviously it's not too good an idea to get thinners around these. They do sort of swell up, they will go back down, but of course you want to try and keep everything in as good a condition as possible, and seeing as everything's brand new in this carburetor rebuild kit, obviously trying to keep everything protected, make it as good as possible, always a good idea. So always make sure you just give it a little bit of time, just make sure all that thinners has gone, everything's evaporated off, so that you're working with a nice dry clean base on that carburetor. And another thing to add would be always double check the float valve once you've got everything ready to put that top piece of the carburetor back on, because as I sort of mentioned before, the last thing you want is the float to be sticking. You want that float to be as nice and free as possible, so that it moves as it should as soon as the float chamber starts filling up with fuel. As I say, the last thing you want at this point is to get it all back on the car, realise the float is stuck, and start having fuel going everywhere out the top of the carburetor. So as you can see, we're just starting to get those carbs back on now. So, as we're getting the carbs back on, I'm just going to have a little bit of a talk about the linkages between the carburetors. Now, this is for the throttle cable. It has an entrance on the side and this nut which has, as you can see, lots of different cuts in the top. Now, what we do when we're getting this back on is we get a nice bit of grease on this ball joint. We get the throttle linkage on there, and what we're going to do is get this nut back in. And the idea with the sections cut into the nut is that as you tighten it up, you want to tighten it up so that it is nice and tight. But as you can see, that's then very stiff. So the idea is we then back this off slightly until we've got a nice bit of movement in there, and then these holes around the edge are for a split pin. We put a split pin in there so that the nut doesn't work itself loose and throttle linkage is nice and free. So we've got all the carbs back on, lined up in position, all the choke linkage and the throttle cable all nicely tightened up, all adjusted so that we've got a tiny little bit before the throttle so it's nice and responsive. We started putting the nuts and washers back on, but obviously we would like to use new nuts and washers on everything. We can replace the nuts, but we can't replace the washers as they are a very specific washer, and I'm not sure if you can see that, but they've got a slight dish to them which acts like a spring washer. So they are a very specific washer that we have to use just underneath the nuts. But luckily we can replace the nuts. So, one of the next things while we're working through the fuel system is the fuel filter. Now, as you can see, this does not look like it's been looked after. It's not looking great condition. It's very filthy. So what we're going to do is we're going to strip this all down, get it all cleaned up. We've got a new fuel filter to go in. I'm going to get this looking as good as new before we get it back on the car. So with the fuel filter, they are quite a simple device. There really isn't too much to them. Basically 2 bolts that bolt it to the chassis by the left-hand fuel tank, 2 banjos on either end, and a large bolt which runs up the middle, which basically holds the bowl in place against the rubber seal in the top, and of course the actual fuel filter inside of it. Obviously they should be a very dark satin black from new. Some of them occasionally do have the stickers on the front, which they are still available. You can still get the stickers. They are available from Superformance, so if that's the way you want to go, it's worth trying to get hold of one of those. With this one we are leaving it blank, but one thing we will do, which you probably won't see in this video, is once we've cleaned all the crap off the outside, we will then take it away, make sure it's get it down to bare metal, clean all the old paint off, and then prime it and paint it, so that basically to try and make it look as good as new. Also, as well, as you can just see now, brand new copper washers and everything. It's always worth doing, making sure everything's got brand new copper washers, so you've got a good tight seal, because again, as with the carburetors, the last thing we want to do is get everything looking all nice and then have fuel dripping down everywhere, ruining the finishes that we've managed to get on the chassis, on the engine, and stuff like that. Obviously all of this does take quite a bit of time, a lot of time on the wire wheel, as we've mentioned in previous videos. We love the amount of time we have to spend on the wire wheel, but it is always worth doing, because the end result, when everything looks the way it does, it really does make a difference. It really does make a difference. And of course, anybody coming to inspect the car, if we choose to sell it on, the next owner, or even if we was to put it through to concourse and stuff like that, it's all these little details that really matter, that make the car into something really great, how it should be. So now we've got everything cleaned up, we can start getting it all back together. So, new rubber washer, nicely seated. New fuel filter. We'll use the old rubber grommet. That is a lot more secure. You can get the freshly painted bowl back on. Lining up okay. tightened up, nice and tight, in the 13mm spanner. There we go, looking a lot better. Put these in loosely for now, so that we get them in the right position for the pipes to attach to once it's back on the car. There we go. Alright, so fuel filter's all done, tank's back in with a new strap, and we are slowly starting to get there. Well, that is it for today's video, guys. The carburetors are all back on, fuel filters all back on. We're all ready to start changing fuel lines, getting all the fuel lines renewed, and yeah, hopefully get it ready to fire it all back up. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like on it, please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all on the next one.